All right. Yeah. So coming to today's session, Journey to AppSec Maturity, we have Vivek Venkatachalam, who's head of the Connected Vehicle Product Security at CNH, which is a global organization pioneering in the agricultural technology. Many of the innovations that you see that feed us and feed the world come from CNH. And he's going to be sharing his journey to AppSec Maturity today. Seen it a few times before. And looking forward to hearing it again. He tells it in a very interesting way every time I hear it. So Vivek, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for that very flattering intro, Raj. So as Raj mentioned, everyone, my name is Vivek Venkatachalam. I head the Connected Vehicle Product Security team at CNH. Some of you might have heard of our organization. Some of you might have not. We're primarily responsible to produce agricultural and construction equipment, as Raj mentioned. Listed down here are some of the brands that you might be familiar with, which is Case IH, New Holland Construction, Case Construction, and some of the smaller firms that are part of the CNH family that you might have seen if you've ever driven across the Midwest through all the cornfields. There's a high probability that you would have seen one of our equipments on there. Just a brief background. I have been at CNH since May 2022, which means I'm coming up on almost 3 years here at CNH. Prior to this, I worked in the automotive industry. I spent my entire career in the automotive industry, just quite similar to the ag and construction equipment manufacturing industry. So I worked at Fiat Chrysler for about 8 years. It used to be known as Chrysler back then, now known as Stellantis. And then for a couple of years at Bosch, which is a leading tier 1 supplier, not just to the automotive industry, but pretty much every industry that you can think of. And also at Eaton, working on cybersecurity on electrified powertrain components. So it's been an interesting journey here at CNH so far, and I'm excited to walk everyone through it. So when I started at CNH in 2022, I'd just like to recap where we were at as an industry. We were faced with multiple regulations coming our way, right? As with most most regulations, these emanated out of Europe, right? But they are being adopted in the rest of the world. And why this impacts us is because about 35 to 40% of our sales come from selling our equipment in the European continent. Just walking through some of these, the Cyber Resilience Act, for example, this effectively classifies a tractor as a very expensive digital toy. Now, for context, a tractor is a machine that weighs about 30,000 pounds, give or take, and costs anywhere between $750,000 and $1 million per piece of equipment. And what Cyber Resiliency Act does is classify a tractor as a digital toy. Right now, this is not very far from reality because, like most folks, I also thought that these are tractors. How much tech can be there? All they need to do is plow a field. They don't go very fast. They're, kind of geo-constrained. But what I've come to learn and appreciate is that there's an incredible amount of technology that goes into each one of these machines. There's a huge number of IoT components and precision engineering electronics that go into a typical farming machine, right? Now, each one of these regulations, as I go through this, need to understand that it impacts the entire connected vehicle ecosystem. What I mean by that is there's local farming. So there's tractors that are working on a local field, but at the same time, there's a large amount of data that is required for the adequate functionality of the tractor in and of itself that is being processed within the boundaries of the tractor, within the iron machinery, and also being communicated with both our cloud backend and our customers' computers, laptops, tablets, mobile phones, anywhere where they decide to control the operations of the tractor from, right? So these regulations span their coverage over our entire onboard equipment and our offboard infrastructure, right? So this effectively mandates security over both our fixed and our non-fixed infrastructure. Yeah. We were also faced with compliance to R155. This is something that you might have heard of that impacts the automotive industry. Although tractors and construction machinery are not in scope of this regulation for now, this is always looking over our shoulder. Why? Simply because the tractor has a motor, it has a cabin, and it has at least 4 wheels, which means that it can be driven on road. And although no one's going to steal a tractor and use it as like a getaway vehicle, there are multiple components in there that can be stolen or that can be compromised, and there's access to a lot of data in it. The third one was the machinery product regulation. And this required us to monitor all of the implements that get attached to a tractor. So not the tractor in and of itself, but there's implements such as, hole diggers, brush cutters, rakes, anything that goes on the back of a tractor that speaks with the tractor. We are required to monitor all the communication that's going back and forth, and by extension, secure the applications that are used for this communication as well. And the last one that was facing us was the Radio Equipment Directive, or known as RED, which now renders any device that is used in cabin that can be used to communicate over the internet as a radio, right? So this means that any application that has wireless communication capabilities has to be secured in accordance with the rules that have been laid out in this regulation, right? So recapping all of this, as an industry, tractors and construction equipment were thought to be of as archaic machines or archaic iron, which wasn't very smart, doesn't have any communication protocols in it. And these were, at the time they were introduced, were radical regulations that does establish agriculture as a tech-focused industry, right? You hear the buzzword about everyone in the automotive industry saying, well, we're no longer a manufacturing company, we're now a tech company. Well, guess what? You're going to start hearing that from the ag and construction equipment industry soon too, right? Now, in addition to all the regulatory demons that were facing us, we also had a bunch of high-profile attacks that were going viral at about the same time. So what I've mentioned here are a couple of examples. So, for example, Australian ethical hacker 𝗔𝗯cie had discovered vulnerabilities both on our backend, so our infrastructure, and onboard components of John Deere. And he exploited them. He gave a talk about them at Black Hat. In fact, he played Doom on the display module of a John Deere tractor. And this really highlighted the importance of product security in agriculture and construction equipment space, right? In addition to this, there was also an actual incident where there was a ransomware that impacted another OEM known as AGCO. This was in May of 2022. And this really brought the conversation about cybersecurity into the spotlight, right? At that time, there still wasn't very much difference between traditional infrastructure and non-infrastructure based security, but people were at least speaking about this, right? So all of these put together meant that as an industry, be it CNH, be it John Deere, be it AGCO, be it Claas, be it any one of the suppliers, cybersecurity was beginning to enter the collective conscious of the people that were in the industry. Now, there was limited knowledge and a lot of scattered development, as opposed to automotive, which was much more collective in their response to some of these incidents. But the road ahead had to be mapped quickly, and we had an example that we could learn from. Now, coming back to CNH, what did we face as a team at CNH? This was back in May 2022, right? So we were seeing that software teams were developing in pipeline-based dev environments, so they were doing CI/CD-based development. But this was a mixture of both Azure and GitLab. For on-prem development, they were focused on model-based development. Now, what this means is that these are clusters of teams that have been developing software since the 80s. In the same way, they're releasing software packages over email, and there's really no regulation. There's no process around it, right? These requirements that came out of their system designs were version controlled on Polarian, on Jira, and Azure DevOps, and Git, and there wasn't any unified security tooling available. And even when they were, we discovered very quickly that they weren't configured in the right way. Right now, embedded firmware has its own dev environment, process, and toolchain, which is completely separate from web, mobile, and cloud applications. Okay? The connected ecosystem is a combination of both our embedded firmware, our embedded devices that have connectivity, and our backend. So that means all of our web applications, our mobile applications, our cloud applications, which are required to work together for the proper functionality of a tractor. Now, we could map this out, but it wasn't clearly called out, right? So the dev teams of both the embedded and the web, mobile, and cloud applications were mostly siloed and were unaware of what the other teams were doing, right? In addition to this, we also face a broad spectrum, and we continue to face a broad spectrum of development languages that are being used, which is, if you talk about embedded firmware, there's C, C++, Golang. On the web, mobile side, we have Java, JavaScript, C#. It's basically, you name it, we use it, okay? So we need to build out custom security tool chains to cater to the needs of each one of these dev teams. Now, embedded software development is quite different from a traditional application development. I'll get to that in just a bit. But basically, it's model-based development and autocode generation versus, you're writing code or you're auto-generating code and then shipping it off into a Kubernetes cluster. So these are two different things. We also found that each team, and we have roughly 3,000 developers at CNH, split into about 200 different teams. So each team was using its own release process, right? And what this means is that we weren't able to be at the security gate before a software went out in the wild to be used by the public and, more scarily, to be exploited by the public. Most of these teams weren't even considering security at that point, right? So each team would release to a different location. They would use customer quality gates. They would use customized quality gates. And this was primarily driven by customer demand, which it should be. But we were hoping that they would consider security as well, right? So if we consider just the pipeline-based development, at the time, there were about 10,000 code repositories that were not mapped to any application whatsoever. Now, what this means is that when we try and secure a code repo, we have no idea if that code base is contributing to one of our crown jewel products, which could bring down the whole company, or someone's personal pet project to manage their individual finances. We had no idea because they weren't mapped. Right? So we were essentially in the second degree of ignorance, which means we didn't know what we didn't know. Right? So we faced a huge array of blind spots and potential blind spots that we were discovering as we peel back the onion. Right? I do want to touch upon supply chain security here also for just a bit. So manufacturing industries in general, and automotive and agricultural construction, they all fall in the same space, have a very complex supply chain to produce vehicles, get them off the factory line and into the hands of our customers. This means that sometimes there's complete COTS components that we use on our products, and then there's customized hardware and software components, customized hardware only, customized software only, customized hardware plus part of the software, so that's base software such as device drivers and the like, and an amalgamation of all the above. Right? And especially when it comes to ag and construction equipment, most of our vendors are boutique vendors, right? For whom it means, for whom implementing a security tool chain means upending their entire business, right? So supply chain security is a manufacturing rabbit hole that I don't want to dive into today, but I just want to make it aware that, it is a giant problem that the industry is getting together to solve together. I do want to plug in one of our fellow members' books in here. It's written by Cassie Crossley. It's called Software Supply Chain Security. It is a fantastic book for anyone that wants to read it. We also had very little control over our security toolchain. We didn't have ownership of our security toolchain either. And I'm talking about, our SAST, SCA, and our DAS scanners, right? So these were mostly an afterthought, and they weren't purpose-built tools for security. They were used for quality and artifact management, and security controls and security checks were available as add-ons in these tools. And lastly, security culture was virtually non-existent, and it was thought of something that would be worked out with safety and quality engineering, right? And it would be something that was done on the site, not really something that we need to focus on or we need to kind of think about as we design a new product. Now, all my gripes aside, what we did have going for us when we joined is that we had a blend of folks. We had a blend of team members that were both tenured at the company, and this means that they knew where to look. And we also had folks that knew what to do once we found what we were looking for, and a whole number of folks within that spectrum, right? So this really helped us create playbooks and a roadmap, not just to be compliant, but to become resilient as an organization for all of our applications in the connected vehicle ecospace. Right? Security also happens to be a greenfield project at CNH, which is a huge boon. What this means is that we aren't just looking for quick fixes and band-aid solutions that will, just kind of get us over the line and get us to be compliant with regulation. We understand, our management understands that a strong resilience to security depends on secure foundations, right? And we're lucky that our management really has backed us to create long-term solutions with specific goals in mind that go just above that go beyond just being compliant to any new regulation that comes up, right? I know I've spoken a lot here about embedded security versus application security, embedded development versus application development. Well, almost everyone here, I presume, is familiar with a standard SDLC. What I do want to highlight here is that at a very high level, the difference between embedded firmware and a traditional application is that embedded firmware is written to run independently on devices that provide very little by way of compute or storage. Okay, what this means is that newer controllers have maybe 4, 6 to 8 megabytes of firmware memory, and they're processing commands that are safety critical and that are required to control the functionality of a 30,000 ton machine in a precise manner. Right? What this means is that the hardware and software are very tightly coupled. Right? There's custom operating systems that are written for each of these devices. There's custom device drivers that make each one of these devices run. And what this means from a security perspective is the firmware on an embedded component should be treated as a traditional application, and it should be secured just the same way as any other application, right? And B is that hardware vulnerabilities are just as significant, if not more, as a software vulnerability, right? The compromise of either hardware or a software vulnerability will lead to an undesirable outcome. Okay, I just want to walk you through a product threat landscape as an example, right? So right here at the bottom, we see a tractor or a vehicle that communicates with an implement, right? This is the rake that we were talking about earlier, which is subject to NPR. So the communication happens over a bespoke protocol known as isobus, or also happens wirelessly through RF communication. As we start to expand this around, we look at all of the functionalities needed around this agricultural equipment for it to function the way it was intended to be, right? We start with radar, LiDAR, hyperspectral imaging, ultrasonic data for agronomic sensing, right? And this is where I say that it's no longer your grandfather's tractor, right? These are machines of the future. These are million-dollar robots that are operating on a field. There's local diagnostics that the vehicle needs to understand in order for it to modify its functionality based on what works and what doesn't. There's V2X communication. So this is the vehicle to the infrastructure, vehicle to other vehicles, vehicle to the fleet communication, which is needed for automatic replenishment of, seeds, fuel, physical access to the machine. There's also GNSS and broadband radio, which combined provide you with precision agriculture kind of mapping, right? So these tractors, in most cases, are driving by themselves, and they need a combination of GNSS and broadband radio for local correction to ensure that they are on track, that they're not destroying your neighbor's farm or they're not destroying your own, right? We also have manufacturing, so supply chain, where there's real-time data, there's real-time software updates that are being delivered to these machines, because you need to understand, as opposed to cars, which maybe you use for 3-4 hours a day at best, these are machines that are required to run 24/7 for multiple months at a time. So any software updates have to be real-time while the machine is running. There's no possibility of a shutdown to do a software update and then restart. We're also looking at V2V, especially when it comes to some of these bigger corporate farms where vehicles across a fleet need to communicate with each other to optimize the farming schedule. Now, these are some of the attack vectors that I've traced out here for each one of these components, right? Now, when you add to this the telematics of it, right? So one is we feed our application maps and our farm maps through USB ports on the tractor. This is, again, done real time. We need a backup communication system right? When you think of a farm, you're not exactly thinking, it's like there's a Starbucks with free Wi-Fi available. No, oftentimes these are in places where there's no internet connectivity. There's no internet connectivity available. And so having a backup communication system for primary mobile or satellite communications is extremely important. We also have telematics, including third-party data loggers or firms that we work with, right? This is a very diverse industry with limited players, which means that we need to be capable to work with other people's equipment as well. And we also have agronomic information coming in from our local mobile network and other IoT devices that are part of our entire connected vehicle ecosystem. These are used to detect, the quality of the soil, the weather in the farm, any pathogens, or, the tractors being broken into. So physical security as well. So again, if we were to map out all the attack vectors in this space, that's another attack surface that we're building out. And now for all of these to work together, we do need connectivity with the internet, right? So the farmer is controlling the tractor through their local tablet or mobile device, feeding in the local application maps. They are also connecting to the internet, and I'll map out the attack surface here right away. So there's no ambiguity here. Yeah. So through internet data, the farmer is working with our cloud backend, right? So we have through internet connection, the farmer is sending critical agronomic farming data to our cloud backend, and we're providing him or her feedback on information that they need to make the decision for themselves as to what the tractor should do next, right? And we're also engaged with our dealerships in this chain. Now, this might be funny, but we do have tractors that break down or tractors that aren't functioning normally. For example, if you see our diagnostics, if it throws up something, we need, say, a part update, a software update, hardware update. Our dealerships should be ready to go and service these machines in the field immediately without any downtime, right? So all of these arrows that you see here, this is what makes up the connected vehicle ecosystem of a typical tractor, right? And we're just scratching the surface here. And this is what we're required to protect. Now, what this meant, it felt like we were in a scene from Everything Everywhere all at once, right? There was just information coming in from every direction, right? There were discussions surrounding, hey, how do you define a product? What product needs to be compliant with what regulation? What does secure software development really mean? What does secure hardware design really mean? How are we doing governance and compliance? How are we going to do vulnerability monitoring? This is a semi-aging fleet of machinery that's been running since the late 90s to the early 2000s that continues to be in operation, and we need to offer all of this to the farmer at no additional cost. How do we do all of this, right? And we were receiving questions all the way from the board right to the developers, right? So it became clear what we needed to do pretty immediately, and we need to do action on all of these kind of right away, right? So we needed to normalize secure software development, right? Our processes were informative. There weren't any cybersecurity considerations, and we need to make cybersecurity normative by releasing a secure software development lifecycle process. We need to identify and quantify the vulnerabilities on our products, right? So every dev environment is different. Every CI/CD pipeline is configured differently, and they weren't managed in accordance with any of our known best practices. On-prem development was being conducted on non-CI/CD pipelines on Hadoop servers and being released over email. We need to get security tooling in place to detect these weaknesses and vulnerabilities across the tool chain. So this meant getting SaaS, SCA, DAS, infrastructure scanners, everything in place. We also needed to establish a cadence to remediate these vulnerabilities, right? Establish a vulnerability management program. What this meant initially was this weekly meetings, monthly meetings, establish a cadence, develop a connection with the actual development team to kind of get the seed of security planted in their mind while continuing to monitor new exploits and vulnerabilities in the field. We also needed a roadmap to regulatory compliance. We were 2 years away from R155, 3 years away from RED, 4 years away from NPR, and potentially 5 years away from CRA. So this is a cascading series of regulations that's coming at us, right? So we need to get a roadmap in compliance pretty much immediately. And this was to mitigate risks that we don't necessarily own. So we had to mitigate these risks through influence, right? Development teams were kind of working separately from quality, safety, and security teams. And so the compliance would be dependent on hardening these products that were developed by an org, not necessarily reporting into security. So this had to be done by influence, right? We also had to immediately remediate known exploitable vulnerabilities. There's a huge list on 𝗔𝗯liche out there, and we need to detect if any of those vulnerabilities are present on our systems and get started with remediating them. And lastly, we absolutely needed to establish a security culture, right? We had to implement security by design, so we wouldn't be stuck bolting security onto products that were already in the wild and being used by our customers. Now, what do we do about this? So one of the first things we did was we leveraged existing policies. So for example, drawing from the NIST CSF, our National Cybersecurity Strategy that came out in March of 2023, we used ISO SAE 21434, and we used kind of tribal knowledge, 27001. I can list all the standards here, but I won't bore you to death doing that. But what we did effectively was created a SDLC policy, a secure SDLC policy, a secure SDLC standard, and laid out the processes for secure software development across the board, right? We also look to increase awareness among the developer community. What this means is roadshows, right? We conduct roadshows. We continue to conduct roadshows today because, there's always a churn of developers and everyone needs to be aware of the latest and greatest in security. We established books of knowledge for anyone that was interested in sharing the pain that we felt, right? Anyone from the developer community, anyone that wants to be like a security champion, kind of propagate security within these teams. So we did set up a security champions program, opened it up to everyone, whether they were developers or not, right? You never know who's speaking with whom outside of the meeting. So this was just a greenfield program that we said, yep, come one, come all. We will meet on a monthly cadence to discuss new security concepts. What's new? Is there something that you learned in the news? Is there something that, your wife's colleague's grandmother told you about, a new hack that was happening that was being reported on the news and you didn't know what to do? How do we stay safe? Right? So we were discussing these issues as well. We had lunch and learn programs and a virtual open door hour every week to address any queries whatsoever related to security, right? We also met teams where they were, right? So we were looking to get into prioritizing security and deliver easy wins, right? So what this means is that we conducted internal sprints per business unit. We identified easy to fix vulnerabilities and deliver quick wins, right? So this means that with minimal effort, we're offering maximum value. We already started to show them saying, hey, look, your security score has now gone up, right? Your application is now more secure than it was before this fix was implemented. And of course, this was varied due to the nature of the software development process itself, but that's what we were looking to do initially. What also became very clear immediately is that we needed a way to centralize all of this data, right? What this means is that we need a single pane of glass because we're meeting all of this development is happening in different pockets. We needed a way not just to be able to view what's going on, but also to be able to set the adequate controls. And what was very clear from the get-go is that we needed this tool to be agnostic to any other security tool, right? Our governance process has to be absolutely agnostic. Now, we kind of went through multiple tools with varying degrees of success, but we saw that almost every tool had an intrinsic bias towards their parent organization in terms of the data that it was collecting, right? So again, it became very clear to us that we need to avoid tool bias during metric collection. And that's where we landed on a tool that some of you might be familiar with, which is Armor Code, right? So this gave us the ability not just to centralize our data, but also classify it by business unit and take targeted actions based on each unit's requirements, right? So there might be an embedded team that's off developing software on a different cycle. They have one release every 6 months, for example. Whereas there's a mobile app team, which has 20 releases per week, right? So different strokes for different folks. So Armor Code gave us the ability to be able to classify each of these applications by their hierarchy and then design specific controls for them, right? And the last thing really that we did is we focused on the people, right? I know when it comes to security, usually the talk is about, people, process, and technology. But what we found was that the greatest processes and the greatest technology can be defeated by the weakest people, or not even the weakest people, can be defeated by people. So that is key. having the right people in the right seats and having them with the knowledge and empowered to take decisions is key to making the process and technology a success, right? So we were going after people and trying to preach the gospel of security to them, right? So they wouldn't see security as a hindrance to releasing the latest and greatest features. Rather, they would see it as a force multiplier, right? So all that said, where we're at today, so I've broken this down into where we're at within security and where we're at with our partnership with these different developer teams, simply because of how we're structured as an organization, right? Within security, we're increasing tool coverage, right? Our internal target is an average month-over-month growth of 10% increase in tooling adoption across SAST, SCA, DAST, IAC, container scanning, and pen test coverage, right? So we're continuing to do the roadshow on the side to make sure that we're getting a growth in tooling coverage, because we can only resolve what we know. And in order to know something, we need to have the adequate tooling coverage on it. We're also defining metrics for our application security process, right? And we use 4 key metrics, right? One is findings over time. So the lesser number of vulnerabilities you have, the lesser bug fixes you need to implement, right? And this is really critical to highlight the importance of secure coding practices and to establish guardrails for the development teams around software development and reduce our overall security debt. The second metric that we set up in this space was vulnerability burn down rate. This is, how many of these findings are we actually burning down? And this is key to highlight, how much of the bug fix pie do we have allocated to security? It's got to be high at first, right? Simply because you have so many bugs, so many security bugs that haven't been fixed. But then the goal is that it will plateau over a particular point in time, and then it will start to go down, right? So this was key to know how much of that bug fix pie was being assigned to security. We also used resolution SLA as a metric, right? So this really plays in as a metric with the previous metric, which is the vulnerability burn down rate. This lets leadership know how many products we continue to ship with bugs in them, right? Here's when it was detected. Here's when it shipped. We needed to have fixed this, right? But here's how many of these we fixed. And so here's how many bugs still remain in your product as it's being shipped out to our customers. And these SLAs, of course, are customized based on applications. And the last metric that we continue to use is tool adoption, right? This again goes with point number 1, because this gives us an insight on what we know, what we don't know, and which teams might be just, working around security to ship out products. So we have no idea about, our embedded software or applications that are out there in the wild that have bugs in them, right? We're now also within Armor Code starting to use the pen test module to standardize the way in which we perform our pen tests, right? For now, we're using it just for web apps, but we want to expand this to the smart iron that gets shipped, right? When we do a pen test on a full tractor or a full combine, we want to use the pen test module to capture that effort. The next point is we also use automations and runbooks to do the heavy lifting on triaging and finding for us, right? And here's where really, and I'll get to this in just a bit, we're looking for AI to partner with us in this space, right? With any org that starts detecting vulnerabilities where there was nothing before, the first few months are going to be like drinking from a fire hose, right? You're going to see 10,000 vulnerabilities come at you all at once. Now, we use runbooks to eliminate known false positives based on our tribal knowledge. And we also couple this with deduplication to help us identify patterns in vulnerabilities across products, right? And this enabled us to reduce our mean time to remediation through partnerships and having teams to talk to each other. For example, we've been able to bring down our average mean time to resolution from 180 days to 35 days for our crown jewel application over the past year, right? Our target is to bring this down to under a week over the next year, right? And this is where I said, we're going to be looking to leverage AI to continue doing some of this heavy lifting for us. And really, it's my pie in the sky requirement, but it's basically something that the developer is just able to review a bug and is able to hit accept, and it does the full validation as well, right? And this part really, where we've used partnerships, we've had teams talk to each other This is where we use Armor Code as a town square, right? I'll get to it in detail in just a bit, but this is where we have developers talk to each other using Armor Code as a platform, so they aren't reinventing the wheel for their own application, right? For scope, again, we have roughly 1,200 and change applications that we need to secure, right? So if each one spends time reinventing the wheel, A, they'll be put off by security, and B, they're going to take forever to fix these within their applications, right? And through Armor Code, we've also been able to get a grip on our security toolchain footprint, right? We know what are the security tools that are available that we're integrating with. We're able to identify overlaps. We're able to identify gaps. And this has helped us drive a more conscious use of the tools that are available at our disposal, right? And it's also helped us shine a light on some of the tricks that we might be missing out on. Now, getting over to partnership. Oh, I guess I missed vulnerability management on there. So for vulnerability management, we have been able to establish a unified process for vulnerability management. And this is in terms of reporting out our top 10 vulnerabilities and kind of our top 10 list of offenders. And we share this across the organization every month, right? And this is not something that I typically like to do, but you got to do what you have to do. Coming to partnership, right? We have got our leadership to buy in to the security program using the metrics that matter. And these were the 4 metrics that I highlighted earlier, right? We kept taking feedback if there was something different that they want to see or if they want to highlight it in a different way. But these 4 metrics helped in answering all the important questions that senior leadership had, including the most important one of, so what, right? I have all these vulnerabilities in my system. So what, right? Using these metrics, we were able to show the real world business impact in avoiding hidden costs and how, by using Armor Code, we've prevented the release of buggy applications that could be exploited in the field. Right? As an example, I'll tell you, we have a critical crown jewel mobile app that 100% of our customers use called Farm HQ or Field Ops right now. So this app is what farmers use to control, to monitor and control their machines in the field. And we were going to perform a release that had about 10,000 vulnerabilities on it. And this was just because someone had fat fingered, a whole bunch of information that was proprietary into the source code in plain text form. This was discovered 1 week before release, thanks to Armor Code, right? So we engaged with the team immediately. We removed the most critical vulnerabilities within 5 business days, and we enabled a secure launch. So this means that our proprietary data and the data of our customers would not be leaked to the public, even if someone were to try and, kind of play around with the application. And we're continuing to have security fixes being pushed out to fix all of the other vulnerabilities that we weren't able to accomplish within those 5 days. But the key here is, for example, as you see on here on the graph that's on the right that some of you might be familiar with, we got the security score down from a 1,000 to a 340 within 5 days to enable the release, right? And this really brought out the value of having a single unified tool and speaking to the metrics that leadership was able to see and appreciate. Right? So why I'm talking about all this? This is key because, the applications that our farmers use in the field to control their machines is mission critical, right? A farmer, so to put this in perspective, right? A farmer goes through a seeding, planting, growing, harvesting phase to a selling cycle once in a year, right? So every decision that's made by the farmer at every stage is keeping maximizing crop yield in mind, right? Over the course of a lifetime, if you think about it, a farmer gets about 35 to 40 shots at getting this right over the course of an entire lifetime, right? And our applications are the backbone of these decisions, right? Both, in terms of making the right choice from the crop that's grown, to the soil conditions, to fertilizer requirements, to what is the market demand, to what is the harvest efficiency. Across all of this, the farmer is relying on us to provide them with data to make the best decisions in their interest, right? If any of this data is compromised, the yield for the entire year has gone for the toss, and the likelihood of the farmer coming back to CNH the next year has pretty much gone out the window, right? So these are the hidden costs that we presented to management, which, once you learn them, you cannot unlearn them. And it really helped us get leadership dialed into prioritizing application security, right? We've also helped tune the SDLC practices through preventative maintenance, right? When we observe a pattern of repeated vulnerability types, we're able to offer customized preventative maintenance training, including secure coding guidelines, how secure coding guidelines can be implemented within a particular application development team. We do very much encourage teams to speak with each other to learn about what they can do so they never have to see our faces again, right? We're not in their faces saying, hey, here's how you want to secure your application. You want to get a SaaS tool, the DAS tool, here's how you fix it. They don't want that. We hope they don't want that. And they shouldn't have to see our faces ever again. We continue to discover new applications by the day and application enhancements for applications that are in flight already. We bring them into the security fold, and through sheer practice, we've gotten better at onboarding these teams onto our security framework, right? We've also begun to work with some of our more traditional infrastructure teams, and we're getting them to start scanning infrastructure. So infrastructure where our farming data, our applications, any PII data is hosted. We need to get that scanned, right? And our goal really is to have Armor Code be the single source of truth for our entire security posture, from server to farmer, end-to-end security for an application. Because the leader doesn't really care. I mean, if you go to the C-suite, there's an incident. They don't care if it happened because of vulnerability in the source code, vulnerability in the infrastructure, how it was hosted. They don't care. They just want to get it fixed. And this will really help us get it fixed in real time. I do want to share some of what worked through this process and what didn't. So we have been laser focused on our customers, which are the developers, right? We've been actively listening to them. We've been meeting them where they are. We've been trying to address their pain points. And doing this quickly and initially helped us establish our credibility as a security team, as an AppSec team. And we did take a leaf out of the Purple Book community here, and we are building a community internally that's helped us maintain that relationship and hopefully make a small ripple in the security culture at CNH. Now, in order to build a community, we used Armor Code as a town square, similar to what you see here, minus the food trucks, of course. We ditched, the traditional RBAC-based controls to say, yeah, you can only have access to the application that you control. We provided access to other similar applications that dev teams were developing, right? So they could cross-reference with each other, discuss solutions, with our presence just serving as a foil to build a conversation around, right? We invite teams and developers to the platform. We give them a guided walkthrough with what they can expect from the tool while assigning tickets. We add similar teams as watchers of this ticket so they can monitor how these vulnerabilities are being triaged and addressed and how it impacts the security profile of their applications. And we also encourage developers to think about the muscle mover findings within their applications, right? Again, least effort, maximum benefit to security. So find and fix vulnerabilities that will have largest implementation on that will have largest impact on the security profile with minimal effort. We're also observing patterns to deliver quick and tangible wins, right? So this really helped us making connections across teams by observing patterns and saying, hey, why don't you speak to this other developer? They're doing something similar. And then, whether it's web-facing criticalities, whether it's third-party dependencies. Yep, Raj, you have a question?
No. So I just wanted to let you know that there are a couple of questions. I don't know if you want to take them now or later.
Sure.
Whatever you choose.
Whichever. I can go through this in about a couple of minutes.
Okay, sounds good. Just do that.
Okay. So again, what we effectively found was that we were gamifying AppSec, right? We were having the developers come in, look at their security score, and then go back, fix it, and see their security score down, number of vulnerabilities going down. And this was a motivation for them to come back and make security an addictive process, right? So we're literally seeing across precision engineering, the number of tickets that were raised going down from 30 tickets per week per application down to less than 15 tickets per week per application today. And over the course of the next year, we do hope to get this down to under 5 tickets per week per application. We're also looking to boil concepts down to the basic, and this goes directly with what didn't work here, which is the excessive use of security jargon, which everybody, including myself, have been guilty of in the past. We didn't want to be intrusive to the development process, right? We Definitely didn't want to tell the engineers what they needed to do. We were just, playing the supporting role in there. And, playing boogeyman didn't really help. If we go to an application team with a CBSS score and say, wow, this is greater than 9, so you need to fix it right away, they would just laugh us out of the room. So that definitely didn't work. Again, what's next is we want to continue identifying efficiencies in the security process. We want to standardize our risk assessment methodologies using existing standards and upcoming standards, such as the ISO 24882, which is a purpose-built standard for agricultural cybersecurity. We do want to implement risk-based vulnerability management. This is something that we're really looking forward to doing with Armor Code. As I spoke earlier, we are looking to leverage AI to further reduce the mean time to remediation. Again, we want to try and keep it simple, right? Avoid the use of security jargon, things that people don't understand, and continue to adapt, right? The bar for security is continuously changing, and we need to be quick in adapting to trends, whether they're TTPs, advanced cryptographic algorithms that make our current solutions archaic. We do need to continuously monitor and adapt to ensure that our customers will continue to feel safe when they use our applications, and they will trust us to protect the future of agriculture.
So, Vivek, thank you so much for an excellent presentation here. So insightful, so much to learn. The numbers are impressive. Like 180 days down to 35, and your vision of taking it down to 7, very, very impressive. And then the shining light on the criticals, always very important. So thank you so much for sharing your insights, and thank you all for joining us and participating. I hope you found this useful. If you'd like to suggest any further sessions, please let us know. We would be happy to chat with you. If not, we hope to see you on April 8th for the AI in AppSec session, and hopefully in person at RSA.
All right. See you, Sir Raj. Looking forward for the RSA meets.
Absolutely. It's going to be fun, right?
Yeah.
We'll make it even better this year, sir.
Always you exceed the expectations. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. See you.
Thanks for the opportunity. Bye. Thanks, everyone.